All right, I'm going to cut the trivia a little short because I started a little late because I had some small technical issues. Had to do a full reboot. Internet was not working. I don't know what's going on. I have my suspicions. We might get into those today, but welcome to another Office Hours. I'm Matthew Groves. I'm glad you're here. I see Gamler is already in the trivia, dropping some knowledge. Hello, hello, Gamler. Glad you're here. This is my agenda for today. So we're going to keep working on Conduit. That's basically what I'm going to keep doing every episode, every stream until it's finished and deployed. Surly Dev, I'm less glad you're here, but still moderately glad you're here. What's going on, Surly Dev? For those who are not familiar, Surly Dev is, of course, incredible Twitcher in his own right. And I'm actually 100% glad he's here. So, but we have a little bit of Surly Dev likes to give me the business from time to time. I'm sure he'll post his clip at some point in the chat there. But welcome, Surly Dev. Surly Dev's a moderator as well, if you didn't see that. Yes. So then, Conduit. What I'm going to do specifically is I've done a little bit of work outside the stream. I probably shouldn't have, but it was kind of rote, boring stuff for the most part. Added validation rules to the validation we already added to the project last time. And a couple things I want to just review that, see how that looks, and talk about passwords a little bit because that's something of a sticky issue. Yeah, there's the clip right there. He kind of posts that whenever he gets the chance. Very proud of that clip. And then I have some validation left that I left for the stream because it's a little more interesting than the normal validation rules. This involves actually hitting the database. So we're going to talk about that, see how that goes. And hopefully that won't take too long, but get that rule implemented. And then we're finally going to get onto integration tests. I say that every time, but yeah, we're going to get the test containers, as Gamler mentioned. They are very cool. I have experimented with them a little bit already off the stream just to make sure they work, because I did have problems with Docker last time, but look at this. Docker is working. So a reboot was the issue there. The other issue with, well, we'll get to it. There's other issues with Docker. And then if we have time, I want to talk more about JWT headers. There's some more developments in that away from the stream on Stack Overflow that I want to address and see and just revisit that a little bit. So let's get into it. Let's go back over here. We're using Visual Studio today. No particular reason. I like switching back and forth between Visual Studio and Writer. It's only a whim away. I don't remember that one. That's a new clip. I have to check that out later. Or I don't remember it. Who knows? Okay, so we were looking at auth, and we're looking at specifically these validators for login request. Maybe. Hello, there we go. And registration request. And I don't remember which one. I think I was probably working on this one when we ended the stream. And so you can see what I did was I just added more rules, right? So for the username, it's again, I've added everything cascade mode stop. I think that's kind of the way I wanted to go, just show one message at a time. Also good for testing. I could see arguments for and against that though. Username must not be empty. And I put in a max length of 100 here. I thought, with Couchbase is where I'm going to store this data. There really is not a limit like that. Like I don't have to set a limit on a field like I would in a relational database. It's essentially a nvarchar max for JSON, right? The whole thing. But I thought it would be good to set a reasonable limit on a username because we're talking about building a medium type clone here called Conduit, and it's going to show usernames as an author of a post or something, and if a username is too long, it's just going to look ridiculous. So I thought I'd put a limit on there. I don't know, Reddit might have a limit to usernames, Twitter might have a limit, that sort of thing. So I thought 100 was a pretty good limit, and we can revisit that later. And that's the great thing, is if I need to change this to a smaller size, all I gotta do is change it here, and then the database will automatically follow along at that point. Of course, the old ones that were super long, they'll be grandfathered in, but I don't have to make any changes to the database to make that happen. This one is what we're going to talk about today with username. We'll get to that in a second. Email, rules. Let's see, Gamlor. Well, safety limits are still reasonable, mostly to block something which is obviously wrong, like a 1K long username. Yeah. Someone who's trolling or trying to do an exploit or a spam bot, they might put in a super long username just to kind of test the boundaries. But yeah, I think this is a totally reasonable limit to put in there. If someone has a legit reason why they need a 101 character username, then they can email me or whatever. Okay, so for email, I've got must not be empty and must be a valid email address. I want to talk about this one for a second. So there is a built-in email address validator rule for Fluent validation. I didn't use that, and I'll tell you why. Yeah, contact support for 101 long username. Totally fine. Submit a GitHub request if it's really that important to you. I'll tell you why. So the email validation rule for Fluent Validator is essentially, is there an @ symbol in the string? And that's the only thing it checks for, which to me, that is technically valid, right? So with email, you really can't validate an email address until you send an email and then, not get a bounce message, that sort of thing. Get them to confirm that email address. And as far as I know, Conduit does not have any sort of confirm email address workflow in it. There's no endpoints for that, as far as I know. I suppose we could add one. It probably wouldn't be a problem to add that to the spec. We'll talk about adding stuff later once we finish implementing the spec. But what I wanted to do is a little stronger. So I'll just look at something here. So this is a valid email address. If I said foo@bar, well, let's say foo@gov. That is a valid email address, 100% valid. It's very, very uncommon to have a TLD only for an email address, but it is totally valid. In my point of view, let's just say someone types in foo@example. Again, totally valid email address. However, I think it's far more likely that someone is going to type in foo@example when they actually mean foo@example.com. Right? I personally have never run into somebody with a TLD email address. I think it's far more likely that this will be a typo than it would be a valid email address. So therefore, I brought in this email validation library, which is just called Email Validator. It's a NuGet package. And it allows me to specify, do I want to allow TLDs? And I said false. International, yes, that's totally fine. And then it validates the password. So that's what I brought in for that. You may disagree with that. You may want to be a little more liberal in the types of email addresses you allow. That's fine. But that's why I did that. And I put plenty of comments in there about why I did that. So this is a great use of comments, is telling the person reading this why I'd use this instead of the normal Fluent validate email address. But in reality, the only way to truly validate this email address is through send you an email, you click the link or enter a code to validate that you got that email. That's the only true way to validate email address, but this is fine for now. Okay, password. So we went through some of this already in the last stream. Not empty, got to be at least 10 characters, got to have a digit, uppercase letter, lowercase letter, and symbol. Now, password complexity is also something of a controversial topic, especially among developers, because I could devise a password with this set of requirements that is not very secure, right? So something like this. Password 11. Not terribly secure, right? It's a pretty simple symbol substitution there, and just added numbers to the end, and it's a very simple dictionary word with a 0 in there as well. That is a secure password according to my requirements here. Conduit spec does not specify. In fact, it gives an example of very, very insecure password. So I'm trying to be a little more real world here, so I put those in there. But one other step I might want to consider, and I'm not quite sure how I would implement this. This might be more of a UI thing to implement, but I have to probably create an endpoint or actually, what I could do is there's this library called ZXCVBN. That's the actual name of the library. This is a library that's been implemented in lots of different languages, including .NET, including JavaScript, that actually provides a measure of password strength. So if you've ever seen the XKCD comic where it's correct, horse, battery, staple, this has no numbers, symbols, or capital letters, but it is not this one specifically anymore, but this is a very secure password. It's 4 different words in series. It's very long, easy to remember, right? That's an important thing about secure passwords, is if you can't remember them, then that makes them, potentially you want to replace them with something that's easier to remember that might be less secure. But this library here, and I haven't tested it, it will probably rate this password as very strong, even though it doesn't pass these criteria here. So what I could do is I could replace this stuff, all of these, with a ZXCVBN check to see that it's a certain strength. And that same library could be used in the front end with JavaScript to test the strength as well, and those would match each other. So whatever the client submits is going to pass this criteria. I would do another check just because it's server-side and client-side can be manipulated, but check with the same consistency library that it has strong enough password. The only issue with that is, again, if we're following spec and any other front end can use my back end, the front end would have to use this library. Otherwise, it would be a very confusing user experience. So I've put that in there as a to-do, something I may revisit later, but something I thought I'd make note of here in the stream is, yeah, I'm going to go with something really simple, dumb, and common with password validation, but there are better ways to do it. Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about another validation topic, and let's write some actual code. We're going to talk about usernames. So, I forgot login. So login is actually very, very thin validation, just checking if it's not empty. And my logic for this is that it's going to be checking the database anyway. All right, so I may as well just cut down on the rules here and let the database do the checking. Although, if I wanted to cut down database usage, and this might be something I'd look to in the future if I'm doing sort of benchmarking and trying to improve performance and reduce strain on the database, I could add all those same checks here, right? Because if I didn't allow you to register with an invalid email address, then you shouldn't be able to log in with it either. But I left it really thin right now, just to start with. But I left a note here again. This is a great use of comments. Generally speaking, I'm very anti-comment, but it does make sense sometimes to put in a why or a thought process into how the code is written. Because the rest of this, to me, and this is a great thing about Fluent Validation, it's very readable. This is a rule for this email address, which belongs to the login request. The login request goes to the login request handler, right? So it's a workflow that you can follow just by reading the code. Again, hopefully. I don't want to be too presumptuous there. But the reasoning, I look at this code and say, well, why isn't there more validation? And then this comment might answer my question there. So that's my thought process there. Okay, so one validation that I commented out, I haven't implemented yet, is for username. If I'm registering as a new user, we already know that email address must be valid. It must be unique, right? And this goes back to the validation of email addresses. I could potentially register for an account with an email address that I don't have access to or that I made up. Totally possible right now. But while I'm registering, I could also enter a username. And in this system, email and username are 2 different things. I could enter a username that someone else has already taken. So this happens to me all the time. I try to register for something and I use M. Groves. M. Groves has already been taken. There's lots of Matt Groveses out there, or Mark Groveses, or Melissa Groveses, etc. But the thing about Couchbase now is that the key of the data is email address. I made that decision a few episodes ago. The username is just a field in the JSON data. Now, in a relational database, what I could do is I could put a unique constraint on that field. And then again, I would let the database enforce this logic for me to say, oh, I can't do that because it's not unique enough. Now, you still might want to do some validation to check that, so you don't have to go all the way to the database and back to make sure that the email address has not already been taken, or show a more friendly message or something like that. So what I've got to do here is I've got to put another method in place called not already exist to check to see if that username is already in use. And so to do that, I need to access the database to check to see if anyone else has that username. So another great thing about Fluent Validator is that I can just give it, oops, that's the constructor already. I can just put some constructor injection here. Bucket provider, just like I'm doing with my mediator objects. And now I have database access in my validator. Okay? And so the great thing about this bucket provider step here is that unless it gets through all these rules, it's not going to get to this rule right here. I don't actually know if this matters, but I'm going to take this rule here and put it at the bottom just to make sure this is the absolute last rule that gets run. I don't want that database call to happen frequently. I don't know if that makes sense. We could look that up if we needed to. But let's go through that. Now I need to check the database. So, time to bring up my database here. And I'm going to sign in to my Capella account. Couchbase Capella is Couchbase as a service, DBaaS. I've got a cluster here called, trial cluster. I've got a bucket in there, one for Twitch chat, which my bot, I didn't even check my bot. Is he working today? Yes, so my bot is using this bucket right here. And it stores every message. So 8,500 messages in there. But Conduit is the actual bucket for the demo app, or the real world app that I'm building right now. So if we go into that, there's a default scope. In the default scope, all I've got right now is the users collection. And here is the users in there. It's just 2 of them right now. And so you can see username is Jacob for this, all right? And over here, username is also Jacob. So I've already got, this has already happened just in course of testing, that I've got duplicate usernames. So let's go ahead and delete that. Not that it matters. This is all just kind of test data right now. So I want to check. If someone else tries to register with Jacob, I need to say, oh, it's already been taken. Sorry. So therefore, I need to basically select any documents where username equals what the user is trying to register. So that would be a SQL query. Or in the case of Couchbase, SQL++. Alt Jim 96, welcome, and thank you for the following. I appreciate it. Always great to see new faces here. Just doing a little bit of validation code right now. So I'm going to do a query. It's going to be select. And you know what? Let's go ahead and do this in fact, something I've been doing for a while is using GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT to help me write some queries. So let's do this. Let's do something a little bit interesting. Let's take this example of a user. Here's an example of a user document in Couchbase. How about below is an example of user document in Couchbase. Write a SQL++ query that checks to see if a given username already exists within the entire collection, users collection in Couchbase. And let's see what happens. So there's the JSON example. So we're going to ask Copilot to write some SQL++ for us. And let's see what it comes up with. So there is some SQL++. So it's using a count. This query is going to return a count of rows where the username field matches the input value. If the count is greater than 0, it means the username already exists in the user collection. That makes sense. To optimize, we can add an index. So it's already getting ahead of me, in fact. Because, yeah, we don't need an index for this. Make the query more performant as it can directly access the desired field without scanning the entire collection. Yes, absolutely. So let's go here and try it. We're going to go to query and paste it in. And I need to go to conduit. And I like to space out my SQL like this. Interesting that it just put Jacob in there for me. But let's go ahead and try it and see what happens. So yes, this is what I expected to happen. An error. Because by default, Couchbase does not create any kind of what we call primary indexes, or what you consider in the relational world as a full table scan indexes. So the reason for that is performance, because data in Couchbase can be very, very large and can be distributed across multiple machines. So enabling a full scan of everything, you're not going to have a good time. So we need to implement an index for this. But let's just look at this query and let's think about, is this the best way to do this? Right? So I count where users equals Jacob. So that's one possibility. Let's put it over here in a comment. What's another way we could do that? Any other ways to write a SQL++ query to accomplish the same thing? Let's see what ChatGPT has to say. And if you have ideas in the chat, throw them in there. You know, how would you check for if something already exists in a database? Okay, here's another way you can accomplish the same thing. So this is saying use keys. This is not going to work because the username is not a document key. And I didn't tell it that at the beginning. I probably should have. That won't work because username isn't in the document key. Email address is the document key. So I'm just kind of correcting it, and it should come up with some alternative. So it's complaining already. It's difficult for me to provide a specific response. However, based on the code you provided, it seems that the not already exist method is, that's interesting, because now it's looking at my code, not already exist method. So this is something GitHub Copilot can do. It can look at the code that I'm writing, use that as context. Yes, I told it it's the document key. Won't work. Searching for the username, so using email address as a key. So what this is saying is, okay, so it's off on, yeah, this is not going to work either because now we're looking email address, and I don't want to do that. So, okay. Well, I was hoping that would come up with something else, and what we could do, for instance, is I could just say select, something. So I could just select meta. UID, select the document key from users, where U equals Jacob, and I can limit it to 1. So it's going to return the first one that it finds. And if it returns anything, right, then I'm going to consider that to be a duplicate. So that was what I was thinking. And the question is, which of these is the best way to go? So I won't know that until I create an index. So either way, I need to create an index on username. That much is for sure. So let's go over here, and I'm going to go to my migrations, and I'm going to create a new migration to public class creates index on username field in users collection. So if you're not familiar with, this is a library of my own creation called NoSQL Migrator, but it's inspired by projects like Fluent Migrator and Entity Migrator. What is going on here? Oh, I don't need a constructor for this. Wait, no, not migration, migrate. That's a mistake I make in Fluent Migrator too. So I have an up and a down, and I'll just create this in its own file. And I told you this is an earlier stream. I like to put numbers. I'll have zoom it on. So hang on a second. I like to put numbers in front of those just so they are in the order that they're going to be run by the migrator. But obviously I can't use those in the class names, and there's no reason to use those in the class names. So we're going to create an index. Create.index, and I'm going to call this index user's username. Kind of index naming convention, the collection that I'm on and the field that I'm indexing. And on scope, which is, well, do I have an on default scope? I do have an on default scope. On collection, and the collection is users, right? I believe that was what I called it. I go back to here and see, yep, it was users. And then what else do I have? On field, and I could say username. Now, I kind of skipped a step here because I wanted to see if ChatGPT could recommend a index. It said it recommended the creation of an index. I got signed out from Capella already. It recommended the creation of an index, but it didn't actually recommend the index. So let's go back to history, and let's see if it can do that for me. For this SQL++ Couchbase query, recommend an index for optimal performance. Now, the for optimal performance is kind of implied for a developer or DBA. Like, yeah, obviously that's why we're creating it. But I want to be with ChatGPT and Copilot. I'm trying to be very. You got to be very prescriptive and very, specific in what you want. So let's try that there. And I'm also going to do it over here in ChatGPT, which it looks like I've been kicked out of that because I closed Visual Studio. I want to go ahead and clear out my chat history as well. Yep, just in case. I don't want anything sensitive to appear on there. So GPT-4, and let's see if it will create a query or index for us. Let's see what GitHub has to say. What? Holy cow. All right, so this, I don't know how this happened. This is wild. It actually recommended a NoSQL migrator code for me, which is completely crazy because NoSQL migrator didn't exist in 2021. It's doing this purely based on the code that I showed right here. So that's bananas, but that's very impressive. I'm very happy with that, in fact. Okay, but can you do it with just the? Let's just be more specific. Recommend a create index statement to create a query for optimal performance. That is what this is doing behind the scenes, is saying create index. So let's see what it has to say. ChatGPT, however, since it's just a web browser, it doesn't actually have access to my code. So it's being a little bit more like, okay, this is what I think an index might look like. So this looks to be the same index that I would create with my migrator script, but let's see what Copilot has to say. It's still stuck in NoSQL migrator, so that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool that it's actually figured that out based on my code and the library that I've created. That's a very, I would say nearly unknown library. But that's very cool. So I'm happy with that. But just trying to get confirmation that the index is the correct one. So that looks to be the case. And then for a down, let's go ahead and delete index, ix users, username, from scope. There's no default scope, is there? So once again, I need to go back to my own project and add an issue because I forgot something. Yep. So I created one already. In default scope is missing from create collection, and it looks like from default scope is missing in delete from, wait, what is it? Delete index. And how I want that to look is from scope default from collection users. And I think that's it. I don't need to specify anything else. Yep. Okay. So, and I made a typo there. Okay. Currently this works, but from default scope isn't available. It should look like this. From default scope. I'm doing that because default scope, default collection, it's potentially something that you can use a lot, and no sense typing in a string and risking a potential typo there. So just a nice little convenience method to have. All right, just making more work for myself. But there we go. We've got an up and a down for that index. So I need that index before I can actually implement this query. And so what I'll do now is we're going to go, and I could just do this from here in PowerShell, right? Right in Visual Studio. I've got this migrate up batch file, and that's going to apply the migrations. I wish it was a little more verbose, but it's going to apply those migrations to my Capella instance, so you can see it's not showing up there. Why hasn't it shown up yet? It might still be taking some time to appear, but I would expect it to be at least not status ready, but status loading. Oh, why isn't that happening? Let me take a look at the migrate batch file off screen here, because it has, oops, not this. It has sensitive information in it. Just double check. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it seems like every time I go to reach for migrate, I run into a new issue. Which is kind of annoying. Did I not compile? That could be the reason. It's trying to, basically I haven't given it a, I haven't compiled it, so it hasn't found it yet, which kind of seems obvious. Okay, yep, and so let's put a not implemented exception here for now, and rebuild. Okay, yeah, and I've got this test, which I also need to put a bucket provider mock into. We'll get to that later. I don't think that's going to be a problem yet, but we'll have to add a test for this, of course. Okay, so now let's try it again. Migrate up. Again, I kind of wish this was a little more verbose about what it's running. That would be nice, but there we go. So now there's my index for Conduit. If we look into that, you can see that it's going to be, hopefully, it'll load up here. Yeah. So there's the index that I created, and that's exactly what ChatGPT recommended, creating it on the users collection. Now, it didn't specify the bucket and scope, but that was kind of implied. So there we go. Index is created, and we're ready to start running a query. So then I go back to my query workbench here. And now this query should actually run this time. There we go. It succeeds, and then we'll look at the other option, which is right here. So then what I might want to do is to see which one of these is going to be faster. So one potential way I can do that is just kind of eyeball it. So here is the limit version, 1 millisecond. And here is the count version, also 1 millisecond. Maybe I can look at the RTT instead. That's 248 milliseconds, 267, 235, 215. It's getting lower and going back up. So somewhere in the range of let's just write some things down here. So this is the count query, anywhere from 197 milliseconds up to, what was it, 258 milliseconds. We'll run a few more just to eyeball it. So 260, that's a new high. This isn't terribly scientific, but well, that took extra long that time. This is going to vary a lot, especially because I'm on a trial cluster, which, behind the scenes, it may be sharing some infrastructure with other trials. It's probably only running on one actual node, so it's not terribly performant. But we're just kind of going to eyeball it here. So that's the range, about 200 to 250 milliseconds. Now let's go back to the limit one, and let's see if there's any difference there. So this is the limit query. That's 280, 259. The other thing to take into account is I only have like one piece of data in there, so this does not take very long to look at everything really, but we're just kind of eyeballing it. 275, 204. 252, 201, that's a new low there. Okay, so we're not seeing much difference, although this hasn't gotten below there we go, 200. So 190, that's the lowest we've gotten so far. So it looks like it's about in the same range here. We're talking a millisecond and 200 milliseconds-ish range for a round trip. So we're both basically in the same ballpark, at least right now. We might want to benchmark this later when we have more data. But just to go with, I'm gonna go with the simpler query, simpler to read, in my opinion, I think, is the count. One username. Yeah, that count. Okay. All right, so check for, let's see, check for existing username, SQL. And lame, what's up, Coding with Calvin? My lame impression of the count. Count star from Count von Groves. From. Okay, now this is something that we'll have to think about, but I'm going to just right now hard code it. Conduit default, and it is users, and we're going to give it an alias. I always like to use aliases, just the way I roll. I've used aliases ever since I learned about them, and it just, in my mind, I don't have to repeat this big long, kind of locator or symbol here. I can just use it. So u.username, is it lowercase username? Yep. Equals, and in Couchbase, the syntax for parameterization is $. You can also number them if you want to, but $, is what I like to go with. So now we can actually run the query. If I remember how to do this. In fact, why would I have to remember when I have ChatGPT here? Okay. How do I write a SQL++ query from .NET? Query for Couchbase from .NET. Query with a parameter, named parameter. Okay, let's see what it has to come up with. There's plenty of examples out there, hoping it can find this. Okay. I'm not sure this is quite right. This might be using some outdated code, but let's go ahead and it is at least async, so that's nice. Paste it in there. So query request. Yeah, I think this is old. This is like Couchbase 2, if I'm not mistaken. So that's not right, I think. Can you change the example to use the Couchbase 3.x.NET SDK? See what it comes up with. Appears to be struggling. So let's go ahead and, well, What is it doing here? What on earth? Not already. Okay. Yeah, so I don't know what this is. It created that. This is, I don't know what that even exists. Is that actually, is that valid code? Yeah, I don't, oh, let's get options. Where is that from? Is that part of the Couchbase SDK? It is. Huh. I don't know what this with key is, though. That's interesting. Calvin loves dollars, too. Don't we all? So Copilot seems to be struggling with giving me a .NET SDK example for Couchbase. So let's go ahead and ask ChatGPT to do the same thing. No, not that. I'll be a little more prescriptive here. And I'll say, using the Couchbase SDK 3.x. See what it comes up with. This is ChatGPT 4. SQL++ query, also known as NCCL. Well, I would say formerly known as NCCL. That was the old name for it, is SQL++ now. Now, it still may say NCCL some places. And especially in 2021, it would have said NCCL in a lot of places. But SQL++ is what we're calling it now. That's more of the standard name for it. Query request class. So this gives me a full example. And again, I don't know if this is quite right. It looks a little closer, though. Okay, so maybe this is right. So cluster, yeah, this is a duplicate. So, okay, I think this is actually right. So the thing is, for SQL++ queries, they are not at the collection level, they are at the cluster level. Not even at the bucket level, because remember back to my my cluster here, I've got 2 buckets. If I wanted to, I could write a query that joins data between these two buckets, between 2 scopes and 2 collections, everything. I can query my whole set of buckets any which way I want to. So therefore, the query has to live at the cluster level. So if I say bucket equals bucket provider dot get bucket async and its conduit, that's not even good enough. I have to then say cluster equals bucket dot oh, this needs to be in a wait. Bucket dot cluster. And now I can get to the cluster. However, one other thing I could do is I could say I cluster provider and change this. I don't even need to get to the bucket for any of this code. Cluster provider. So I can just skip a step here. Cluster provider, and then I can say var cluster equals cluster provider dot get cluster. And now I don't even have to specify a bucket name, which is fine because I don't need a bucket name. That's actually going to be, I kind of do need a bucket name. It's going to be used here. But anyway, we'll get to that. So then options and then cluster. Why doesn't it like this? Cluster dot, because again, I need to use a wait. My gosh, I forget this so much. Okay. Oh, this needs to be async. That could be an issue for sure, which I hadn't considered until just now. Fluent validation and async code. That could be an issue. Let's proceed and finish out this query. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put that there instead. And query options. Username is username. That makes sense. Now this right here, request plus. That might not be necessary for this particular query, and I'll explain scan consistency here real quick. So when you're creating a query in Couchbase, when you're executing a query in Couchbase, you have basically 3 options about how you want to deal with consistency. So I say that because Couchbase, when you update data with an insert, like a key-value operation, insert, update, delete, all those sorts of things, it's immediately consistent. However, The indexes for SQL++ queries are updated eventually. They're eventually consistent because if you had to update all the indexes at insert time, that's going to add a lot of overhead. So for performance reasons, those indexes are updated asynchronously. Therefore, when you're executing a query, you can specify how strong you want your consistency to be on the read side. The strongest one is request plus, which basically says only execute this query after you've finished updating all the indexes up to this point in time. Okay, so this means that if the username was just registered, for instance, I'd want to use request plus because potentially it's not indexed yet. We're talking 1 second or less to do that normally, but my code could be run in less than 1 second. That's the strongest consistency. The default is not bounded, which basically says I'll just execute this query right away, no matter what the state of the indexes currently are. I'm not going to wait on anything to be indexed. And so that's the fastest because we're not going to have to do any additional waiting. There's also something called AT+, which is strong consistency in the sense that I could tell it only wait for indexes to be updated that affect specific items in the database. So request plus says everything up until this point, wait for it to be indexed. AT+, which you don't see here because there's a different way of specifying it, says, okay, only wait for this specific item to be updated in the index. So it's faster with additional strength, but it requires a little more work to do here on the coding side. So this is the question that I need to ask myself. In this situation, what are the chances that two people, or potentially even the same person, but probably two people, are requesting the same username within the same very short window of time? What are the chances of that happening? And is that worth the performance trade-off? So, because I have such a small amount of data, I'm going to go with request plus for now. But I'm going to leave a note here. Potentially switching can potentially be switched to use non-bounded. Is it non-bounded or not bounded? Not bounded. Not bounded. Scan consistency for reduced latency. If the risk of two people trying to get the same username within the very small window of time is small. Okay, so it's a good note to leave there about why did I choose request plus. And if I was trying to present this to a public person, I might even put a link to see this link in the documentation for more info on scan consistency. But I think it's probably fine to talk about this right here, and this is another option if you want to improve performance. Okay, and then this is going to actually run the result. And now with the async here, the result is going to be something called iQueryResult. This is dynamic. I might actually switch this to raw. Because this is a number, it's going to be returned as, and you saw it over here, it's going to be returned as, where's my count at? Right here. As this JSON array of one object with one field count. Now, I don't need to have all that extra JSON stuff, so I could just say raw. And this is going to return an array, right? But in this case, one value of, this is all valid JSON here, still of course, but it doesn't have the extra object stuff around it. And so what would it return if it was something that doesn't exist? It's going to return an array of 0, right? So we're really just going to get that number and check that. So therefore I can switch this to int. So it's going to be a collection of int results. then if we go back to, was it here? Yes. So we could do a for each to go through that, and a asynchronous for each. But really, all I need to do is just say results count, or count result maybe, equals await result dot to list async. That's probably fine. And we can then say return count results dot any. So if there are any results, then, well, we can start. Just a little bit of a guard clause. If count result dot any. If there's not any results for some reason, then we're going to return false because there's no users in there. Somehow it returned a empty array. I don't see that happening, but potentially if the users collection is empty, that might return an empty array. I don't think so, but and then we can say if we can say how many matches equals count result. This is going to be first. We're only going to expect one item here, and that's it. It's an integer, right? And we can say if the matches is greater than or equal to 1, return false. Otherwise, return true. It's a bit verbose. I could refactor that probably into one return statement. Not already exists. So this would be, so again, I've got the not in there, the sort of double negative. So if there's matches less than 1, that means it doesn't already exist. So this would return true. This would return false if there aren't any results. So again, that should return true, all right? Again, this might never happen, but if there are any results, if there are not any results, then there's definitely nothing in there to be duplicate with. So, okay, I'm pretty happy with that. The problem now is, what do I do about this, or can I do anything about this? So, let's ask GitHub, because GitHub's been pretty good with contextual information. So, how can I call an asynchronous validation function from Fluent validation in a Fluent validation rule? Just validation, just a synchronous function in a validation, Fluent validation rule. Let's see. Must async method. Oh, okay. Well, if that exists, then we're in good shape. Must async. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Fantastic. So this was less of a problem. Async cancellation. Looks like it's already figured out what I want to do. Not already exist. And with a message. And lol, that's awesome. What, the with async? Hey Aaron, what's going on? Great to see you here. So that actually looks pretty slick. Must async. Oh, I figured out what you wanted. Yeah, this has been my experience with GitHub Copilot all day, in fact. It actually, you know, I just asked a question, a general question, and it said, oh, you must be wanting to use this async function in Fluent. So it gave me the whole example. That's pretty cool. Let me show you something even cooler, Aaron, if you just arrived here. So maybe you're not familiar with this, but I actually have created my own project on GitHub called Stand-Ups. That's okay, man. Hey, that's okay. Hey, you got stuff going on. By the way, Aaron, I wanted to ask you about your stream. I followed you on Twitch, and I thought you had a stream scheduled yesterday, but I never got a notification about it. So just wanted to check to see if I missed something, or maybe you skipped yesterday's stream. I don't know. Starts Tuesday. Okay, there we go. So everybody should follow Aaron here on his Twitch. He's going to start streaming as well, building something very cool with in the mobile world. So anyway, I have this library I created myself. This is totally my own thing called NoSQL Migrator. It's very much like a migration tool that you might see for Entity Framework or Fluent Migrator, but it's for Couchbase. All right, so I can create a collection, delete a collection, you know, run migration step 1, step 2, etc. So I've got 2 steps so far. This is creating an index, that sort of thing. I asked GitHub Copilot, I said, create me an index for this SQL++ query. Right here. For this SQL++ query, recommend an index for optimal performance. And I gave it a query. Somehow, it knew how to create an index out of my obscure NoSQL validator Fluent validator library. It did that for me. Pretty awesome that it could do that with an obscure library that definitely wasn't around in 2021. So that was incredible. Yeah, that is black magic to me. So it was able to somehow understand, based on my code, how to do that. So pretty great. Yeah. No, so you're saying burn it. Yeah, it's a little crazy. But this is actually something that GitHub Copilot can do that ChatGPT I don't think would have a chance at doing, because it doesn't have, this is just a browser window. It doesn't have all the context of Visual Studio. So GitHub Copilot was able to infer that, just as it did with Fluent Validator here, which is still impressive, but less so, because Fluent Validator is a much more popular library than my obscure little GitHub project with a package on NuGet. So, incredible stuff. Okay. So there we go. That's great. But now, of course, I need to write a unit test for it. And I haven't gotten to integration tests yet. Aaron's saying Copilot seems so much better. Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, not so much. So I actually tried to get it to, okay, don't use validator, just give me a regular old create index statement. And it refused to do that. It said, no, here's how you do it with your validator tool or your migrator tool. So maybe it's a little bit too contextual sometimes. And ChatGPT is a little bit more general purpose, I think. So there are pros and cons, but yes, I am definitely warming up to Copilot. So where was I? Yes, unit test. We're going to get to integration testing. And this is a great place for integration testing because this is going to use the database. Cancellation, I don't even have a cancellation. Do I? It's never used. Yeah, I guess I could pass it in here. Cancellation token, which I could then use, what, right here? Where is it actually used? Yeah. So I guess I could do that. Cancellation. Yeah, may as well. Put the cancellation token all the way through. No problem with that. Okay. Okay, so back to tests. So we're on unit tests, we're on registration request handler. Now I already had to get this to compile, go ahead and put that in here. However, it's not bucket anymore, it's now cluster provider, which I don't have in my base class. So we got to go to Couchbase, to the base class here. No, I want to go to not implementation, declaration. Okay. So cluster provider mock. Okay. Okay. Now I'm gonna see if Copilot can figure this out for me. This will be pretty cool. Add a mock of cluster provider to this base class. I'm going to say this base class and see if it figures out, I mean, the one that's open in Visual Studio right now. Whoop, what happened? There was a problem. Okay. Let's try it again, I guess. Yeah, this is something I experience from time to time. Just it's under load and errors out, times out, or whatever. Okay, so it looks like. Oh, there it is. Okay, looks like it did it for me. Let's go ahead and. What if I click insert here? Oh, that's pretty cool. It shows me what it wants to insert, and then I hit tab to accept, and there we go. So it doesn't quite get it right because this is not called bucket. It's called. Oh wait. What is this trying to do here? Cluster provider, get bucket. So it's, this should be async though. Right, so it's saying get cluster async, which is not something that, oh, the cluster provider would do. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Get cluster async. And there's no string you pass in there. This is going to return async. Like too many of those. Returns async, and not bucket mock, but the cluster mock, which I don't have. Okay, so it didn't quite get all of it there. Add a mock for iCluster 2. But it's pretty cool that I can just kind of insert and it gives me like, here's what I want to add, and then do you accept that? So let's try that again, see what it wants to add over here. What, did I mess it up? Insert. Yeah, okay. So it kind of did some of the work, but again, this is going to be async. Any string is fine. And it's not going to return bucket mock, it's going to return cluster mock. Wait, is that right? And it returns async. So it's not getting everything right, but it is getting me most of the way there. This should not be, wait. Cluster provider mock. This should be cluster mock. This should be bucket mock. So it's getting me most of the way there, so that's kind of nice. So back over here, then I can say cluster provider mock dot object. Okay. So now time to write a test, and this is a unit test, so we're mocking out the database here. Oh, by the way, I don't think I showed you these tests for all the validation that I added. But I used test case, which I think we are just getting to started on the last time I streamed. But test case is great when you want to basically test the exact same thing with only a couple of variations. So in this case, I wanted to test all these password rules. It's basically the same test, but it's all just different variations of password, getting stronger and stronger. And there's the and there's the corresponding error message that I wanted to output. So we were getting there. And notice I did have a to-do here for the username already exists. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Public async task handle, username already exists, returns error. All right. So the question is, should I try to get Copilot to write this? Let's see what happens. Implement, please. Let's see what happens. Is this MS Test or NUnit or XUnit? This is NUnit. I am NUnit for life. I know XUnit is kind of the popular choice amongst the Microsoft open source stuff, but I am a big fan of NUnit. And it's just kind of what I've always used. I've used XUnit here and there, but I just kind of like NUnit better. MS Test, I never really used it that much. Probably because in the early days it kind of had a left a bad taste in, for a lot of people. I'm sure it's fine, but it's just kind of something I never really got into. So, interesting. It's using should in here. That's interesting. The should library, which I'm not using at all. Let's see what happens. So expected error, document exists exception. So this is not correct. This is expecting an exception to take place, and this validation does not do any sort of try catching. It maybe should, but it's not doing any try catching. Another issue I forgot about is I'm hard coding the conduit and user's name here. I might have to think about that some more, because that would be a good reason to inject the bucket provider, so I can use the bucket name. What about the collection? Hard coding the collection. So far, that's what I've done everywhere else, is hard code the collection name. May want to revisit that for sure. So let's put a to-do on that. Of bucket scope collection name. Okay. All right, so this is not correct. All it got right really is the act and the comments. So let's create a request here. Request equals new, what is it? Registration request. Not result, request. Thank you. And this has the new model. This is basically what I'm doing. I'm just going to copy and paste this mess up here. We talked about the mother pattern last time for this, and at this point I've copied and pasted enough that it might be worth refactoring this to use the mother pattern. The password doesn't matter as long as it's a strong password. The email address doesn't matter, but the username does matter. It's going to be I'm a duplicate, or username already exists. I am a username that already exists. Okay. So make this request here. Okay, so I also need to set up the database mock to do what? So this is a little tricky, right? I basically want to mock out query async, but how detailed do I want to get there? Xamarin required XUnit for a while, so that's how you're forced over to XUnit. Okay, I think I remember hearing that you had to use XUnit in some situation. So, I don't know. I'm not sure what the reasoning is for that. You know what? I am low on coffee. If you hang with me just for a second, I'm going to get myself a refill. I'll be right back. Like 1 minute. Less than a minute. You got to overpromise. No, underpromise, overdeliver. Okay. So, anybody out there in the chat got opinions on this? If I'm going to create a mock, I could get really crazy and basically make sure the mock looks for this exact query to be passed through. Or I could just say, whatever the query is, just return, an integer of 0 or 1, basically. I'm kind of leaning towards the latter. I don't think I need to get too crazy with this. I can assume with integration testing later, it's going to actually do the testing of the query. So all my mock is really handling is the logic in this. So I'm going to lean towards that. So we're going to set the database mock to return a count of 1 or greater. So what I need to get ready there is the cluster query async. So we're going to set up the cluster mock setup query async of integer. We can be that specific, and it can be any string, and we're looking for any query options. It.is any query options. Don't really care. And it's going to returns async. What is that going to return? A iQuery result. So I don't think I can actually new that up. Right, that's what's going to return iQuery result. Gamble says, I stay away from mocking library usage as much as possible. Usually I build up manual mocks, which are then are reusable in many tests. I reserve mock libraries for some rare edge cases mocking libraries. Yeah, I think I discussed this early on when I brought in mocking. There is definitely people out there like Gamelor who try not to use mocking libraries. Do you want to mention why you want to stay away from mocking, Gamelor? I think it would be great to hear that argument here in the discussion. I personally have no problem with mocks. I do think you can get carried away with mocking. Like if I wanted to go ahead and basically use my mock to test that the correct SQL query is in here, that might be a bit much. Integration tests probably be better for that. So I mean, if you stay away from mocking, you're saying you're manual mocks. So you are creating mocks. And so I actually do have some, I guess you can call them manual mocks or fakes in here already for specific Couchbase objects, and I might have to create another one here actually as well, which I think makes sense. I think using a mock library for these fakes would be just too much work probably. So speaking of, this needs to be a, what is this returning? This is returning a iQuery result of T. So let's go ahead and create a fake. Fake query result. That's going to inherit from iQuery result of T. We call it fake query result of T. Aaron's saying, I think fakes force you to understand the underlying code better. Okay. That's, potentially a good argument. So here's my fake, and we're going to put a constructor in here because what I want this to return is basically just what am I actually using? I'm using the extension of toListAsync, which I believe works on iAsync enumerable? iAsync enumerator, yeah. But which is going to return these rows. All right, here's Gamelor's comment. My experience from reading tests with mocking libraries is too easy to get carried away, where the mock setup is a lot of the test code. And that mock library code is often hard to interpret, very easy to be over-specific. This is kind of a better expression of what I just said about mocking out the SQL query, for instance. And he's found with manual mocks, often end up with writing less code that you can easier extend, reuse, debug, interpret. So these are all very excellent points. I do like mocking myself. I personally like mocking library, but it is definitely very easy to get carried away with the kinds of tests you're writing there. So you really have to think about what is under test specifically. And in this case, I could absolutely go crazy and try to test the query that's being written here and end up writing my own SQL parser and stuff like that just for unit test purposes. But I know I'm going to cover this with the integration test later. So all I'm really testing is basically just this logic here and this logic here. That's essentially all I'm testing. Everything else, I just want to mock this out to be returning what I want it to return. So these are very good points, absolutely. So I'm going to have this be well, what can I do here? Can I return a new list? Will that list of T? Will that work or no? toAsync enumerable? Yeah, so I can do that. So I can pass in a list of my fake data to return and set my rows. We're going to make this, whoop, what happened there? Get and private set rows equals fake data to async enumerable. So I'm taking a regular list, passing it here as a enumerable, which is going to then be turned into a list on the other side. So what doesn't it like here? Okay, so the other things, since this is fake, I want to make sure I set these to something because the behavior is not implemented, right? So I don't want any of that to give me any false positives or negatives. So I'm going to go ahead and set these. I'm not using them, at least not yet. Everything acts weird. Time to reboot. Uh-oh. I was just there earlier this morning. Yeah, so see you on the other side. I don't know if this is going to be a problem, because I don't know if this is used or if this is used. I don't know. We're going to find out, aren't we? Okay, so returns async of new fake query result. And it's going to be a new list. Just have one item, which is going to be 1. So there's one person in the database already that has that username. Okay, I'm going to assert that what. This is basically a validation error, so it's going to be very similar to the assert conditions here. This is really just another validation test. The only thing different is that, this uses actual instead of result. Ooh la la. That this is just going to hit the database. Otherwise, it's a standard validation. So my error message here is that username is already in use. All right, let's give it a try, see what happens. Okay, so not implementation exception in what? In the enumerator. So, this is kind of annoying. Can this just return rows dot get enumerator? This need to be, is that going to be okay? What's the problem here? Why is it green? Oh, cancellation token. Okay. That might be good enough. Let's try this again. Okay, passes. Now, just to be sure, if I give this a 0, this should not pass. That's a happy path. Okay, so that's good. It's interesting that it gave me a null reference exception, though. Oh, because, okay. Because it's trying to go, and I didn't set up anything else, so that's fine. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So now that's all tested. So I got tons of tests here for this validator and the validator request, basically. Here's my, where is it? Oh, down here. Auth, handlers, so this, not login request, registration request. This is an important step to get right in the application. Registration submit model. So it's a very, so there's a view model. It's very simple, just 3 things: username, email, password. Doesn't seem like a whole lot there. There's a lot that can go wrong because we're dealing with user input at this point. Can you share this site again you're using for this real-world example data? So you can use my handy bot, enter bang current project, and that will give you a link to the Conduit real-world repo anyway. That's the GitHub repo, and you can get to the Conduit site from there. But that's where you want to start if you want to look at the code. By the way, I believe there are mobile versions of this project, probably as a front end, right? I'm not exactly sure, but that might be something you would consider for your stream, is creating a mobile implementation of this. Maybe a front end, but you're probably going to want to use Couchbase Lite. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to fit into the picture there. But I think it would be very interesting, creating a offline first version of the Conduit mobile app. Which would be interesting that it kind of wouldn't have a traditional back end. It would just be the whole thing in the app, all this logic in the app, and then it'll be automatically, no APIs. I know you're very much, you hate REST APIs for mobile apps anyway. I like REST APIs. I think they're just fine. But I could see why, if you're building a mobile app, and I've been here, why it would absolutely be a horrific experience, because I have had that horrific experience. Building a, it was a, not a native app, but a progressive PWA website that needed to work offline. And we at the time, this was 7, 8, this was over 7 years ago, before I knew Couchbase existed. And it was so much pain trying to build our own synchronization. We were using SQLite. Was it a native app? Maybe it was a native app. I can't remember now. I don't think I worked on that part. I just worked on the back end. But yeah, it was SQLite and SQL Server as a backend. And there was this crazy process we put in place to basically to sync the data. We had to package up everything in SQL Server into a SQLite database, send that down to the client, and work off of that if there was offline. Which I made it sound way more simple than it actually is. It was a huge pain in the neck, especially when it came to conflicts. Oh my gosh. Making changes to the database, because I had to make them now in one more place. And of course, when you have a mobile app in the store, you have to, yeah, it definitely was a native app, now I remember. Probably two native apps, Android and iOS. You have to, when you deploy the store, you have to update the migrations in the mobile app themselves, which is a huge pain in the neck for testing. And it's a whole new deployment to the app stores. Oh my gosh. Ooh, anyway, I don't even want to think about it. Anyway, yeah, follow Aaron, because he's going to build some cool mobile stuff, mobile databases, and my bot stopped. Oh, there we go. My bot's still alive. I've had troubles with my bot. It's kind of been a little bit, it kind of goes offline when it feels like it. It's a very temperamental bot. Okay. So we got all the validation in place for that. I've got indexing I created. We did a lot for this. SQL query, indexing for the query, testing unique username, wrote a test. I think it's time for a nice little commit. And we're getting very close to finishing 2 cards in the plan. So we'll go ahead and revisit that in a second here once I finish this commit. So the cards I'm working on kind of in tandem, although this one is very much registration only. So why don't I bring that up just to make sure I have the right, I can call them cards, but they're GitHub issues. Registration is number 2. So number 2 added unique username checking validation. Sure. So I added all these extra things. So here's what I added, just the one. Well, we added some changes to the setup, added the one test, that all checks out. Added the cluster to the mock base class, and then here's the validation code, which has a bunch of SQL in it. Oh, we need to revisit that for sure. Added the index, reboot, fix the machine weirdness. Well, it usually does, right? I mean, it's a joke from the IT crowd, right? Thanks for calling IT if you tried turning it off and on again. But it's really it works a lot of the time. It worked for me with this whole Docker WSL stuff. By the way, today's mug, Tableau mug. Can't say I'm much of a Tableau user. I think I've fired it up once or twice. I know the Cincinnati Reds used it when I did some help them a little bit for some visualization. I think it was Tableau. But I got this Tableau mug from a conference. I can't remember which one. But hey, if you have a mug that you want to feature it on my stream, just send me the mug. I won't even charge you for it. I'll just drink coffee and show it on camera. Anywho, all right. Before I go into integration testing, because I got plenty of time for that, I want to go back to this validator. This is an issue I need to probably address the project as a whole. Hard coding these names. Not a big deal, I don't think, because I can just say, hey, make sure you call your bucket this and you call your collection this. But suppose I want to call my bucket something different. I want to call my collection something different. Then I've got to go and make changes to this code, which I'd rather not, right? Or change in a bunch of places, which I'd rather not. So potentially I could just make these global constants. That might be one approach to this. Potentially also get it just from the configuration itself. So one thing I want to check. Go back over here to my initial setup of Couchbase right here. So this is all pulling it from the app settings configuration, which I think I can show you this. There's nothing sensitive in there. Yep. So bucket name's in there. Username, password, connection string, that's all in there. But one other thing you can do with the Couchbase dependency injection is I can say add, I believe it's called add Couchbase. Is it called add Couchbase bucket? I thought it was called named collection. Let me go look at the docs for this. And by docs, I mean GitHub. Can that be an environment variable in a config? Yeah, well, potentially, right? So that would be a variation of the global constant. I could list all the collections, right, in here. I could say user collection name, user tag collection name, whatever other collections I'm going to have. Potentially, right? But the other issue there is that that's kind of duplicated over here in another project, right, where I'm saying users. In fact, that might be a stronger argument for adding them to configuration. Is they're also needed here to create the actual collection names and things like that. What I wanted to check, though, real quick, is in the dependency injection project. This is an official Couchbase supported project. I've been using bucket provider and cluster provider. There's also named bucket provider, named collection provider. So I'm interested in these. It can be swapped out in the build process where you might want to use a single bucket for all environments and you just use a different scope and collections for different environments. You're saying if I wanted to take this and make it multi-tenant and have multiple conduits running in the same bucket, potentially. And then they could be different scopes, like if I'm a company like Gannett, for instance, which is a big newspaper company. Well, do they still call them newspaper companies? Oh, you mean dev, UAT, and staging. Oh, okay. Yeah, I suppose you could do that too. Yeah, I could redefine these for if I'm deploying, to a Couchbase Capella dev environment, Couchbase Capella staging environment. Or even if I'm going to use server for dev and Capella for staging and production. Yeah. Yes, that's a possibility. I think I might go that route, actually. I do want to look at these named providers in here. So there is a way I can, and this I still might want to use this, actually, even with the configuration. So I can provide a strong typing to the collection, to the structures that I'm using. So name collection provider, for instance, I can pass in an interface, and then I could get the bucket name from that, for instance. So I want to look into how to do this. Where are the extensions? So service collection extensions. So this is what I'm talking about, where it's named collection provider. Where is that actually used? Never used this API before. This is pretty great. Yeah, this is the .NET dependency injection extensions for Couchbase SDK. I don't know if there's any examples of that code somewhere of specifically named collection provider, but okay. Let's go back to program and explore a little bit. So builder.services, add Couchbase. So I can add Couchbase bucket. Now, I could have sworn there was a named service provider extension on this. If Brant was here, he'd be like, obviously, Matt, here's how you do it. Because he probably wrote most of this stuff. Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask GitHub. Like, how do I configure named a named collection provider for Couchbase. See if it can figure this out. This might be a little too much, but we'll see what it comes up with. Okay. Is an extension on this? There we go. Oh, actually, so GitHub Copilot figured it out, no problem. I just totally underestimated GitHub Copilot. Yeah, this is exactly what I want. So it's an extension on add Couchbase. So add named. Wait, what? Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Add Couchbase named collection provider. So, okay. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Sorry. I'm apologizing on GitHub's behalf and for GitHub. It's a real roller coaster here. Where is that stuff at? Let me just do a quick, can I do a symbol search? Named collection provider. Yep, okay. Well, going back to GitHub then. Do a search here. Named bucket provider. So this is internal. Yep, so where's that used? Named bucket provider. That's, yeah. Service collection. Named collection provider. I'm not seeing it in here. Do I have to add it as part of, add Couchbase bucket first? Well, here's some tests. Let's look at those. Bucket provider. Name collection provider test. Let's see what these tests have to say. Sometimes the tests can be just as good as documentation. So it's checking for null scope, no collections. Yeah. Collection bucket provider. Name bucket provider. What is this from? Okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to have to come back to that, but I still think Aaron's on the right track here, is where I can say something like, I got bucket name here already, so I can say scope name, and it's just going to be default. And I've got users collection name is users. And therefore, probably have to build some sort of configuration object for that, iOptions or whatever. Hey, Gamelor, thanks for stopping by. Glad you're here. We'll see you another time. Thank you very much for your commentary on mocks. Appreciate that. Tell your friends about the stream. Tell them to all show up and give me a hard time. I think I have one more cup of coffee in the pot out there. Okay. So just for instance, I'm not actually getting bucket name anywhere yet, but I believe the configuration does get it. So let's just start with some place that I know is using the database, which is in the auth handlers login request handler. So there's bucket provider, and as you can see here, we've got bucket name. Now this is where named bucket provider would come in handy, because I wouldn't have to use this string here. It would only be in the program. I still think that's probably the best place to do it. Now, why can't I remember how to do this? Man, I really think that's the best way to go, and I can't remember how to do it. Where was it? Let's just go. And I'm not going to give up. We're going to figure this out. You know, it might be in Couchbase docs as well. Dependency injection.net 3.4. Managing connections, okay. Is there anything about named in here? Yeah, here we go. Oh. So it is add Couchbase bucket. Okay, I wonder if that's what I need to do here. Builder.services.add Couchbase bucket. And I need to specify a provider. Right, so I can actually create a interface somewhere. Not sure where the best place to put this. Maybe in here for now. I gotta overhaul this models folder a little bit because it really should be called something else. But I'm going to call it iConduit bucket provider, and that inherits from iNamed bucket provider. This is really just a marker interface. No implementation, and there's no methods in here, so it's just naming it. So we'll call this iConduit bucket provider, and it's getting the it's going to pull the name from configuration. So configuration.get section. Let me just go back to this. Yeah, so it's just getting a string there, but I can just pull that string from Couchbase, and is it what is it, colon, and the bucket name dot value. Is that going to work? So how do you get a let's see, get section. For get section, how do I specify a property of a JSON object in the app settings.json? For instance, Couchbase, bucket name, my bucket name. And this will be, yeah, we're going to do it like that just to be more specific. Let's see if this can help me. Okay, so it is colon. Again, at least according to GitHub Copilot. Okay. Although I hope it's not just taking my code as this is the way it should happen. Because in some situations, it's like, for environment variables, for instance, you have to do Couchbase __ bucket name. I think that's probably right. Now, underneath this, can I do add collection? How do I add a named collection to this? That's what I want to know. So I don't see named collection listed in the documentation, but it's definitely in the project. These are tests. Dependency injection. Where's that at? Yep. Service collection tests. So where is the named collection? Add Couchbase bucket with builder provides named collection provider. So let's see. Oh, this is interesting. There's a little builder. A builder method or action. And this is where I can add scope. Okay, interesting. And this is default. Obviously, that needs to be something else. Add collection. Interesting that add scope doesn't have like a named scope provider. But anyway, user. We call it conduit. Conduit user. We call this bucket provider. iConduit bucket provider. iConduit users collection provider. And that's going to be users. So that's kind of interesting, the way it goes through that. I don't like all these underscores, these squiggles here. So I need to create this as well. Oh, that's the wrong name for this. Rename. Come on. How do we rename? There we go. iConduit buckets provider. And I'll create one. Nope. Interface. iConduit users collection. Seems like a long name, but I named collection provider. Okay. So if I'm not mistaken, this means that whenever I use this interface, as in one of my mediator handlers, for instance, it's going to give me the user's collection directly. And if I go up from that level, it's going to give me the default scope. And up from that level, it'll give me the bucket name. So I think that is going to work. So scope name is also there. This seems kind of long. There might be a better way to do this. I don't know. No, not builder configuration. Oh, this is a different builder. Maybe that's the problem. Let's just call this B. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to pull that in from, it's not bucket name, it's going to be scope name. There's only going to be one scope for this. So, and this is going to be, I called this what? I called it user's collection name. Okay. And so I have to add more collections as we go here. But the benefit to this, so if we go back to, let's say, request validation, no, not the validator. Let's go to mediator first. Login. Now let's do registration handler. So before I have bucket provider, but really, all this is doing is getting this user's collection. So I could, since I'm only using collection here, I could say conduit user's collection provider. Rename this to collection provider. Sure. Okay. And this needs to be conduit user collection provider. I'm going to have to go and change my tests, of course. But I can get rid of this stuff right here and just say if our collection equals collection provider dot get collection async. And there we go. And there's no more hard coding here. So that's good. Now, of course, I have to refactor my tests. Of course. I'm making this harder on myself, I guess. I probably should have done this from the beginning. But that's okay. So this is registration request handler. So obviously there's no more bucket provider mock here. I'm going to have to go to Couchbase mocks. And I'm going to set up a protected mock of conduit users collection provider. So users collection mock. I'm going to leave the collection mock in there for now. There might be a situation where a generic collection might be needed, but so I'm going to ask Copilot to do this for me. Create a mock for this one. Create a mock here. I don't know if I need to specify that, but this was so helpful last time. Let's do it again. That's not what I wanted. I don't want to test. Okay, well, it's not behaving, so we're going to go ahead and just do it. Mock equals new conduit users collection mock. If you have a application that's going to have a ton of collections, this might be an annoying approach, but I think in terms of mocking it might be annoying, but in terms of actually coding with it, it's going to be, I think, superior, because you can handle all that stuff in configuration, not have a bunch of strings, magic strings essentially, in your code everywhere. So users collection mock dot setup. user collection mock. So u dot get collection async. This is going to return. Oh, this is a problem here. Bucket mock. That should be async there. Wonder why that didn't fail. Anyway, that's going to return. And again, I don't really care specifically what it is. Just that it is a mocked collection. So I can use the same collection mock as up here. Now, if I'm doing a test where I'm coordinating between two collections, I might want to... This is not users collection mock, it should be users collection provider mock. In fact, why don't I do that right now? So, yeah. Just in case I need it later. Users collection mock. And that's what I want. I want a specific mock for this one, not a generic one. So. Okay, so this might need some organization, refactoring in the long run. I know with Conduit it's only going to be a handful of collections, but in a real world project there could be a ton of collections. So there might be a better way to approach this, maybe a more generic way. We're going to find out later. But okay, back to the tests. This is no longer a bucket provider mock. It is Conduit user collection. Wait, where's the user collection? Users collection provider mock. Who doesn't like that? Conduit users collection? Collection provider. Oh, yep, collection provider mock. There we go. And I think all the other tests will be fine though, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to find out. Let's run them all. Actually, yeah, I think these might fail because they're using any place where I am specifying behavior. Actually, why is that one failing? Value cannot be null. Let's just go through one. Let's start with one. Why is this one failing specifically? Okay, right here. Collection mock is an issue. It should be users collection mock. Okay, still failing. Why is it still failing? Oh, because it's trying to get through validation? What? Because, oh gosh. These are probably all failing now. In fact, I didn't run all the tests, but they're probably all failing because they're all trying to hit this database now, and I haven't mocked that out. That needs to be mocked out for all of these, right? So I can do that here at this level. Oh, that's annoying. Let's see. I can copy and paste some code to handle that, though. Maybe. Yeah, so the code where it's hitting the database, I just basically need to make that behavior default to fine, right? So right here. And then put that in setup, list 0. So by default, username is not a duplicate. And everything is totally fine. Let me say that. Okay, that should take care of a lot of these errors. So this was an error from something I did earlier, I think. Okay. Let's run them all. See if, okay, so there's still some that are failing because what? Because I can't change the setup once it's in place? Does that become immutable? Pick the true, what was false. Yeah, I think that's what's happening. So I probably, oof. Oh, wait. Actually, this should be, yeah, no, that's not related. So it should be users collection mock. Okay, great. So is there anywhere else that just says collection mock that's not user collection mock? I've only used that twice here. Well, that's kind of good. All right. So I think I've made the code more maintainable by using this named collection provider, named scope provider, etc. Hopefully I get the configuration right. We'll test that in a second. What else? Login request handler. So again, instead of bucket provider, all I'm doing with that is getting the collection, the user's collection. So I can say I conduit users collection provider. And probably users collection provider is a better name for this. Did I? Yeah, let's make this users collection provider. And I'll just bring that on in instead of bucket provider. So collection equals await dot collection, get collection async. So again, taking out all the hard-coded strings and just using a more strongly typed collection. So that's going to be more tests broken. Pretty easy to fix though, I think, because I've already done that work in the mocks there. So collection mocks needs to be users collection mock instead. So again, we're being more specific here. Anything else? Okay, so now I think these should all pass still. They do. Okay, great. So far, so good. Now, the other place that we're touching the database is in that validator. Right here. So it is hard coding, buckets, scope, and collection. So I can get all of those from the I conduit users collection provider. And we'll just see how that works in a second here. So I still need the cluster, yes, to execute the query, but I also need the name of all these things. So for instance, let's change this to $. Now, one bummer about SQL++ queries and parameterization is I can't parameterize the actual names of the bucket scope collection, at least not yet. That may be coming in the future. I don't know. That may be by design, in fact. But what I need is, first of all, let's get the collection equals await dot get collection async. I think I can get the bucket from that, or not the bucket, but the scope. Yeah, I want the scope. Doesn't need to be a wait there. Okay, and then the actual bucket is scope.bucket. Interesting, these aren't async. It's probably just a name that's being stored in there. And then from that, I can go from bucket to cluster. Again, not await. So I need all these things to pull this off without hard coding. So instead of hard coding the collection name, I'm going to say collection.name. Instead of hard coding the scope name, which should be the same for all these, I can now just use scope. And I can now use bucket.name here. So now I've taken away some hard-coded magic strings here. So if I want to change this in the future, I don't have to go and touch this code ever again. I can just change it in configuration. Okay, Then we'll write the, I think it's the same test, right? Tests. Let me just, where's my unit test explorer? We're going to run everything. Run the whole gamut of tests. Okay, I've got some problems. Yep. So this is now, needs to be users collection. Doesn't like that. This is getting a little long, this constructor, but hopefully that's as long as it ever needs to be. And this is kind of redundant, passing this in kind of twice, but yeah, it's just the way the object graph works. Well, we can deal with that. Unit tests, explorer, run everything. Uh-oh. No, why did this stop passing? One more child test had errors. Oh, because there's test cases. So I messed with this. Oh, I think it's because users collection mock gets passed in. Let me look at this Couchbase mocks. Okay. I think I see what's going on there. So this also. Oh, that's a problem. Users collection provider mock. Okay. So then the users collection mock needs to set up m.scope to return scope, which I don't have a scope anywhere, but I could have a scope mock. New scope. No, new mock of scope. No, mock of iScope, right? Protected. Yeah, so I'm going a different route to get that cluster, so I have to mock that route out here in the user collection. So then I have to mock scope mock, set up m.bucket returns, and that can just be bucket mock object. Fine. And then the bucket mock already returns the well, is that going to work? Bucket, iBucket, yeah. So I think, and then that connects it to the rest of the graph. So fingers crossed that that does the trick. Oh, not happy about it. So what is the error here? Let's go to one, just a non-test case. Null reference right here. The cluster's a null reference? How is that possible? The scope returns bucket. The bucket, yeah, I don't have bucket to return that. So bucket mock setup m.cluster returns cluster mock. So that connects the rest of the graph. All right, let's try her again. There we go. Okay. Run them all. Boom. All right, there we go. So a lot of extra stuff in this mocking base class, but the good news is this is done once. And in fact, this could be a base class you could reuse, at least the bones of it, you could reuse within multiple projects. Now, of course, these specific named collections you know, that might make the case for another level of abstraction where I could have something that inherits from with Couchbase mocks, like with conduit Couchbase mocks, for instance. That might be the way to go with this, actually. But I'm not going to get into that too much because I want to get integration testing in today, and I've only got an hour left in the stream, so pretty happy with that. I've taken all kinds of magic strings out of my code, and it's all configurable now. Up here in app settings, all I got to do is if I want to change this from conduit to something else, I can do that. One thing it's not pulling in those names is here in the NoSQL migration classes. So, so these classes kind of assume that the bucket's already created, and you can actually specify the bucket name in the batch file. I can show you that. Kind of. I'll show you the sanitized version of it. Right, so, oh wait, maybe there is not a bucket name. Database connection user, connection password. Oh yeah, here it is. Bucket name specified right here. So if you wanted to change your bucket name to, like, I don't know, my conduit, you would change it right here and not actually in the code itself. But I do want to pull this information from the same configuration. So how do I do that? I wonder if there's a way I could ask GitHub Copilot to do that. How can I pull configuration information from app settings.json in the conduit web project and use those values in the conduit dot, what's it called? What did I call it? Migrations project. Let's see what it has to say. In your conduit web project, add a reference. Yeah. What about the and you reference the extensions configuration and file extensions package. Use the following code to access your configuration values. So it's injecting this in the constructor. Where's that coming from, though? Inject iConfiguration instance in the constructor of our migration class. Okay. Access configuration value using bracket notation. Yeah, that's this stuff right here. I wonder if I can use that with my program instead of this extra long stuff here. Can I do this? What does that return? Does that return a string? I think it does. Let me just double check here. Throw away some code here. Yeah, okay. Well, heck, if that works, then that saves me a lot of this sort of extra stuff. If that's a huge amount, just a little extra code that I don't need. Makes it look a little more readable as well, I think. Still got blue squiggles because potentially those could be missing from the configuration. And they are right now, actually. I haven't added them to the app settings I'm actually using. So I have to go and do that off screen at some point. But let's go back to this. So how is it going to pull that configuration? This is showing it being used. What I don't want to do is have duplicate configuration. You know what I mean? So app settings here, I want to use the same values there in this migrations project, but it's in a separate project. Copilot seemed to think I can just inject configuration in there, but I mean, that configuration is actually going to be from a different binary, the actual migration running project. So I want to see if I can access that access that file from a separate project. Can the Conduit migrations project access the file, the app settings.json file directly? Yes. It doesn't seem to actually make sense here. It just says put iConfiguration on there, but it's not getting. Okay, maybe it wasn't specific enough. From conduit.web directly. So you can accomplish this by referencing those configuration packages. Yep. Access configuration values from the app settings.json file in your migration code using the iConfiguration instance. I'll look for it in the root directory of your project. You can modify it by passing the appropriate path. Okay. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, so how do I instantiate a configuration object in conduit.migrations and specify a path to appsettings.json? Okay. Config builder. Let's try it. And this is probably going to base class, right? But config, and I want to add configuration builder, which is part of what library? So that Microsoft extension configuration. Don't know if this is the right path to take, but if you have any ideas there, if you've come across a similar issue before, throw them in the chat. I'd like to hear your approach. We're going to go with 7.0. Okay, and it also needs the other one for the base path, which was this one, file extensions package. Yep, this one seems legit. It's over here. Well, what about this add JSON file? Add JSON file. What namespace is add JSON file in? Oh, because there's a JSON namespace. It didn't even mention that, I don't think, unless I glanced over it. Yep, another legit looking library, 7.0. There we go. Okay, so get rid of that. There we go, configuration root. And so I could say var collection name equals. You've done something extremely similar before. I think this is a good path to go down. Well, that's good. That's good to know. Config and Couchbase. What do I call it? User's collection name? And scope name. Again, just the one scope name for the whole thing. This could probably go into constructor. In fact, I'm going to reuse them in the down. Although I've got default scope in there now. Collection name and scope name. Collection name. This is a situation where I don't want to use default. I want to specify the scope, even though I know it's always going to be underscore default. Someone else might change that in the future. So, okay, kind of annoying to add this extra stuff here, but we could put it in a base class. Call migrate base, I don't care, which has its own base class. Its own constructor. And config is going to be protected. And should these go in the constructor still? Just do like this. I guess I don't need that, right? It's redundant. So we can just remove that. Convert constructor to protected. Yeah, let's do that. Now do I need to... Nope, still don't need that. Okay. Very smart. Well, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. Move to migrate base. So the next time I need this, I can use it, which I already need to in second one here. Migrate base. This is a situation where I don't want to hard code the index name. I don't really see a need for that. The index name is not something that's hopefully not going to be used in the application itself. It's only going to be used by the database, so no problem hard coding that. I still do want to hard code the scope and collection names. So I'm going to do that same thing here. So again, collection name, on scope, specify the scope, and same thing down here. And on scope. So again, no problem hard coding the index name. That's totally fine. This is the only place the index name is used, so no problem. Okay. So this needs to be a different base path. What base path should be used here to get to conduit.web app settings file? Let's see if Copilot can help me with that. Yeah, I don't want to use an absolute path unless I have to. Conduit web, that's not where it is, but we can start here. Modify this. So I know that, no, I don't need to escape it. So it's currently, I'm going to assume this migrations is in the, Is it going to be in the bin folder when this is run? So I want to go back, up. Yeah, gosh, I don't know. Let's have a look. So when this is run, it'll probably be in this folder, I would assume. So it's going to go back up 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then into conduit web and not configuration. It's just going to be right there in the root. Yeah, so I just put in that folder extraneously, I guess. Optional, false. It definitely needs to be there. Okay, So now I got to take this off screen because I'm going to actually add these fields to the app settings JSON that I'm actually using, which is just 2 fields right now. Scope name and user collection name. I have to add more as we go, but there we go. So this is what it looks like, except the actual one I'm using has a real connection string, password, and stuff, which I'm not going to show you. Okay, so just to test that this works, I'm going to go back to my Capella cluster here, and just going to blow away the collection here, this user's collection. Totally gone. And I'm going to blow away the index, which also, by deleting that collection, the index gets deleted automatically. So then, if I go ahead and rebuild this project, let's see if this works. Migrate up. Okay, there was a problem. Do not have attributes. The base class does not have attributes. Okay, so this could be an issue with my implementation of the migration. Okay, so I don't think this is something I planned or tested for, fortunately. So I'm going to need to figure that out. That's going to be another issue I'm going to have to address right away, probably with my NoSQL Migrator. Using a base class results in error. You know, it's amazing how well dog fooding actually exposes issues with your code. Nope, that's not it. I thought I copied it. Is that copying it? There we go. Migration attributes are required. I used a base class like so. I'll just paste it over here. Oh no, migrate base. Okay, that's an issue again for future me. So in the meantime, I'm not going to deal with that on the stream here because again, running out of time. Really want to get to those integration tests. I'm putting those off, putting those off, and putting those off. Let's comment this out until I can get that issue fixed. Put this into here. Just locally. Oh, this still needs to be from the base class. In there, and I just want to make sure I get the path right and that the app settings is being read from. And app settings on JSON. Actually, what I want to do is what I'm doing over in program, which is this. Adding in a specific environment, which I don't have. Okay. I still want to just going to hard code that for now. Development. Okay. Hacks on hacks, but we'll revisit this for sure. Okay. Let's make sure this works first. Okay, it ran with no errors, so that's a good sign. Did it create me a nice new collection? Doesn't look like it. Oh, I know probably why it did that. So in the default collection, yeah, migration history. I forgot to delete this. This is actually how it keeps track of which migrations have already been run. So it's saying, hey, I've already ran all these. I don't need to run them again. Until I wipe that out. Okay, now there's an exception thrown. So that's probably more like it. probably not finding the app settings file or something. So okay, I'm going to revisit this later. Because it's just kind of annoying. It's going to take me a lot of time to work through that issue. In the meantime, how can I get started on some integration testing? Let's look at that issue instead. I want to get started at least on that. So let me just go back here. Yeah, integration testing. So we got through all this stuff, and I really ran into an issue when it came to refactoring to use less magic strings. And the main issue there is my Fluent migrations. I got to get those to use the same app settings file. But let's look at integration tests here real quick. Just get something working, and we can. I'll come back to the migration stuff later. So test containers. What are test containers? Test containers is, I think I covered this already, but it's lots of, it's just basically a way for you to hook your tests into a live Docker contained version of, generally speaking, databases, but other stateful tools like RabbitMQ or Kafka or what have you. Mostly databases, and I'm going to use it for databases, in fact, here in my tests. So in this place, I need a new integration test folder, and it's, again, going to mirror the project under test. I'm going to create an auth folder, and not auth class, no. Auth folder, and a, what in the world? Why is the conduit test proj changed? Oh, that's weird. Did I make a change here by accident? Did I push a key by mistake? Fat finger, as they say. Okay. So I want to create an integration test for login request handler. Just like I did with unit test, this is going to actually hit a database though. Test fixture. So still using NUnit. Even though it's not a unit test, I'm still going to use the NUnit framework because there's not an integration. It's the same code. It's just the way you write your tests that are different. So what do I want to test? Really, I'm just going to test kind of the happy path, at least to start with, right? So I actually have some code off screen here, a la Julia, what is Julia? I want to say Julia Stiles, but that's not right. Julia, the chef. What the heck is her last name? I can't remember. Is it Julia Stiles? Delete me tests. So I've got, I showed some of this last time. But this is going to be a little different than Julia Child. There we go. Kind of rhymes with Stiles. Yeah, all cake in the oven already, Julia Stiles, or Julia Child. One thing that's going to be different here is, for these tests, it's going to be a one-time setup. I'm going to set up the container just one time. I don't want to set it up for each individual test, at least in this fixture. I want to set it up just once. So that's going to be an async setup method. Okay, and then I'm going to have a test, also async. And this is a login handler. So I basically want to test that the login handler, I mean, I don't really have a name for it. It's the login handler, what could we call it? What would be a good name for this? Naming is hard. Login handler, login request handler. That's what it's called. Login request handler. Logs in. I don't know. Is successful, I guess. Let's start there. We could maybe come up with a better name. Maybe I could. I think I spelled successful wrong. There we go. Okay. And then I have also a one-time teardown, because again, this is actually creating a Docker image, and I want to let it know that, hey, it's okay to get rid of it now. You can spin that back down, close it out. Okay, now what I actually did, again, I did this off screen, is I actually asked, I think it was ChatGPT, to write me a test, an integration test that used test containers, and it did so pretty well. Now I may need to rethink this because of some of the refactoring I did today, but we can start by adding the test containers library to this project. Now, the thing with test containers is you can't just use any old container, as far as I know. Maybe there's a generic container, I don't know. But what you probably want, what would be optimal, is if there is a test container library for the specific tool you're going to use. And it's not one installed, but there's test containers Couchbase. Not terribly popular. It's got a few downloads. But we're going to try to change that. I think test containers is a great tool to use for automated testing. So we're going to bring that on in. And I know this is a valid project despite low number of downloads. It's part of the test containers, and it's got a little validation check here because the prefix of this package has been identified. So we're good to go there. And what this involves is a container object called Couchbase container. All you got to do to instantiate that is in the setup, just say new Couchbase builder with image, and this is where you specify the Docker image you want to use. I'm going to use the latest version of Couchbase Server. Now, in reality, the Capella instance that I'm using is not using 7.2. That's not available on Capella yet, so I'm a bit cutting edge here. But it's still 7.x, still in the same family. That's probably fine. And then do build. Now, with some images, you'll have other things that you can configure. So there's all kinds of host name, MAC address, wait strategy, all kinds of stuff that's on here you can use to configure. This is, I think, all I need right now. So once that's built, then you say, okay, go ahead and start it up. Start up that container. Now what I need to actually get my test to do something is I'm going to need probably a cluster. You connect to that cluster and get the connection string from the container. And I happen to know that the Couchbase builder is going to use default username and password of administrator and password. That's perfectly fine for what I'm going to be testing today. So we'll create that cluster there. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to just put in this test here because Couchbase does take a little time to warm up. And I think the Couchbase builder is supposed to do this, but I want to just be sure. Wait until the cluster is ready and give it up to 30 seconds to get ready. Just as kind of a safeguard to make sure everything's ready to go. The next thing that I learned about this is that it creates a bucket. Now in my database, the bucket name is conduit. But inside this container, it actually gives it a random GUID. Well, I don't know if it's random, but it gives it a GUID, a different GUID each time for the bucket name. So I assumed that Couchbase Builder would create a default bucket, but it actually creates a bucket with a GUID name. So I got to get that name, again, hypothetically. So from that, I can then get a bucket and collection, which again, I'm getting default collection here. That might be okay for my test. We'll see how that goes. Because I'm only going to test the users collection here. It doesn't actually need to be called users. Because again, I didn't hard code that. I actually removed that hard coding. If I was going to hard code users, I need to create a collection called users, but I don't need to do that now. Okay. So let's go into login request handler. I'm going to stick with arrange act assert. Just as with unit tests. The main thing we're going to act on, and probably can instantiate that in the setup. Maybe not. Okay. We're going to say login request handler equals new login request handler. Now I'm not I'm instantiating this mediator class directly, which is totally fine. I don't need to go through ASP.NET, although potentially you could go all the way from the ASP.NET endpoint down to the database and back. That would be, I think, less of an integration test and more of a, like a full system test. And we may want to do that at some point, but we're going to stick with just the login request handler for now. If I wanted to create a test of the controller, I would probably put that in a different folder. I would call it auth, and then instead of handlers, I say auth controllers, and then test the controller in there. And then maybe that would go all the way through the process. But if I have both those tests, then I can see, well, the controller test is not working, but the handler test is working, so it must be something wrong in the controller. It might be something you want to do. Again, that may make me consider overkill. I don't know. So I've got this collection provider. You need to figure that out. This auth service, that needs to be an actual auth service. And the validator for that needs to be the actual thing as well. I can just instantiate that new login request validator. Okay, and that doesn't actually hit the database, so I don't need to pass anything else into that. Okay, so here is where it gets a little different than what I prepared already, is how do I get this collection provider, how do I get this auth service? So this needs to be underscore. Auth service equals new auth service. That appears to not have any dependencies. If there are, it's kind of like they're already hard-coded there. So it has dependencies on these various, Microsoft Identity and stuff, but that's totally fine. As far as I know, that's totally fine. So that was easy enough. Now collection provider is a little different. Can I do that? Can I new that one up myself? So new collection provider. So my test project doesn't have that as a dependency, so I need to add that. The Couchbase stuff. Couchbase extensions dependency injection. New collection provider. What is it called? Why can't I instantiate that? Let's see. I might not be able to do that. Maybe I can say new bucket provider. No? All right, let's go back to the code. So we have to go back to ASP.NET, GitHub, Couchbase, Net Client. See what classes are available there. So dependency injection. So here's iBucket provider. That's the interface. Is it internal? So bucket provider is totally internal. Oof. Okay. Bucket builder. So that's also internal. So anything internal I really can't use because it's internal. What else could I do to build out that bucket provider? Bucket builder extensions. Do I have to build up the whole service collection too? I might have to. Let's see. Okay. Let's ask GitHub Copilot. My trusty programmer companion. How do I instantiate a bucket provider in this integration test? Bucket provider, or let's just say bucket provider. See what it comes up with. Oh, okay. So yeah, this is what it's doing. It's creating a whole DI setup and then pulling it from from that. So that's the way I got to go. That's the way I got to go. So create the DI setup and bucket provider. This is add app settings. So I don't really want to do the app settings because I've already got, So I got the connection string up there. I guess I could hard code it. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Yeah, I think that's what I'll do. Okay. And this is Couchbase bucket provider. Doesn't seem to like that. I think it's just bucket provider. Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, and so, yeah, I don't have to use a JSON file. I can say options dot connection string equals container dot get connection string options dot username, and I know it's administrator. Options dot password, I know it's password. Options dot buckets. Wait, do I need to specify that? With buckets. Set buckets to be used in a cluster. Okay, so I don't need this anymore. Well, yeah, I still want to wait till the cluster's ready. Create a DI setup. Get bucket provider. Okay. Collection provider. Oh, and then I can. So this is basically what I did in the program, right? This could be add Couchbase bucket. What was it? Conduit bucket. Wait. Why don't I just copy it all over? Basically, except it's hard coded. Solution Explorer. Program. Down here. Yes. Yes. Okay. Services. Add Couchbase bucket. I don't need this stuff. I have the bucket name up there. That's fine. Scope. I'm going to go with default. And collection. Going to go with default. Okay. What doesn't like this get required service? Oh wait, this is the builder. Can I go with builder? Not get required service? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So collection provider is really what I need. Collection provider equals builder dot get required service conduit users collection provider. And I don't need the bucket provider. Well, at least not. Okay, I'll keep it there. I don't need, I just need this. So forget that. I'll just say collection provider. Okay, I think that's all I need. And then I can result equals login request handler. Handle, I do need a request. New login requests. New login submit model. Okay, and then for instance, the login submit model. I probably want to keep that separate, right? User equals user. What was that called? User view model. User view model. I'm going to have that be a local variable. So I can use those in the assertions, but email. Okay, this is where it's going to actually hit the database. So something doesn't really matter what's going to go in here as long as it's not a duplicate, right? So That's the thing with integration tests is we should probably act as if there's already data in there, even if there's not. And this is a brand new database, right? So create something relatively unique. So what I like to do for that is there's a certain part of .NET that can give me like a random string. So I'm going to call this Matt, and with path.getRandom file name, that returns a string at example.com. It's going to return a different string every time. And that's pretty good for passwords too. By the way, I mentioned I can get, I limited the usernames to be 100 characters. I put no limit on the password because I do not actually store the password as its full text, I'm storing it as a hash, which will always be a consistent length. Okay, so password, and then why not? We'll put a GUID in there too. Okay. So the issue with this is it's not going to find it in the database because it's not there yet. So I need to go ahead and create that in the database. So I'm kind of doing that manually. Can you do an extension method? Okay, I must have missed that message. Which extension method are you referring to? Because I might be way behind. Or you might be way behind on what you commented on. I can't see a timestamp on these messages. So I want to get a user in the database. So I'm going to put one in there manually. Collection provider dot ins. Wait, no. Okay. So this is going to, let's arrange the handler, arrange the request, and I also want to arrange for a user to already be in the database. Okay, so I need a collection for that. Equals collection provider dot get collection async. This is just the default collection, but in the real system it would be a user collection. That's close enough. All right, collection insert, and it's going to be an email address. I'll pull it from the user view model. Email, and it's going to be not a new string. It's a new object. That's going to match the, let's see, what is it? It's the, it's a user, right? Yeah, I can just use new user. The user in there has there's nesting, right? Because of the conduit spec. Oh gosh, so I'll use an anonymous object to wrap it. Visual Studio, what are you stopping me for? User equals new user. Like so. Okay. And so inside that user, I want to have all these things. Email, I'm not going to put in there. That's the key. Username doesn't matter for this case because that's not used for login. Bio, Lorem Ipsum, don't really care. Image, just some URL. Okay, password. So that actually needs to be a actual, where's my auth service at? Auth service dot hash password of the one I'm going to pass in with this the same salt. Wait, no, I have to generate salt. So I have to use the same salt. Yeah. Okay. Use the same salt in both places. password salt equals salt. Needs to be a comma over here. Okay. So I'm skipping my normal code to insert data because I just want this data to be in there already. It's kind of a precondition for this test. The other test is going to actually do the registration where the data won't be there and then I will be added. So I'm kind of going backwards order here, I guess. Okay, and then I want to assert that result is not null. It should be in await. Yeah, so that's the thing about, I don't know, the naming convention in .NET. Like, it was async method, it's supposed to be whatever the name of the method is plus async, which is kind of annoying. But in a world where you can have code that's async or not async, it kind of makes sense. However, Mediator has chosen to call everything handle. So, for better or for worse, not that it matters. I always make the mistake anyway. So, result dot is, what are we doing here? Oh, is not null. Yep. Assert that result dot user model is not null. Assert that result dot is unauthorized is not false. Got a double negative there. And we want to assert that. Let's put that up here on top of this. Result dot user view dot. Okay, username is, well, email dot is equal to user view model dot username dot email. Yep. And it's not going to return password, right? So let's just go with that for now. Okay, and for the teardown, one line. Container.stop async. All right. So I haven't actually run this yet. This is a lot. What this is going to do is this is going to create a Docker image of Couchbase Server 7.2, set it up, configure it, create a bucket in there, which will have a default scope, default collection. And then I'm creating this code right here, kind of instantiates the providers that I need, connected to that container. And then this test will then execute this handler. Will not put any mocks. There's no mocks in here at all. This is going full database and full auth service, by the way, which fortunately doesn't have any dependencies at this point, but we'd have to add those in here too if those existed. So for instance, if it was Okta or Auth0 or Azure AD or whatever, we'd have to actually connect to a version of that. And that might be another test container, in fact. I don't know if those exist, but it'd be another test container for that, potentially. Okay, then it's going to actually arrange a request, put that user in the database already, kind of skipping past my my data access code to do that. I'm just using the SDK directly. Execute the handler, again, going to hit a real database container, and then assert that everything went successfully, and tear it down. The thing with integration tests is that they do take longer. Let's run and see if this works. So this is Docker desktop. You can see it's actually connecting to the Docker API, and so it's instantiating a test container image with whatever it does with that, and then it's instantiating a Couchbase container. So it's running. So it's taking more time than our unit tests for sure. It's going to keep running. And there we go. It's just running and running and running. We've got a fail. So what's the failure? Unable to what? Resolve service type for Logger Factory. What in the world? So it must... So, interesting. So it must be trying to, in somewhere in up here and add Couchbase, bringing in Logger Factory as well. So can I just say don't do that? I don't necessarily want to use I might want to use logging, right? But I could put in a null Logger Factory. Will that do the trick? Let's do it again. So one thing you didn't see because I had Docker off the screen is those images actually went away. So there's a new one you can see with a new name, Focused Borg. Once the test is over, these containers will actually go away. They will get automatically removed. They're only transient. They don't stick around. That's what you want, because otherwise you're going to accumulate a lot of junk test data over time. So test is still running. Ultimately, I don't want to run these tests on my computer very often. I want to run them on GitHub, which I was hoping to get to today. Looks like I'm going to run out of time for that. So, okay. So it's still not happy with the login factory not being found. Okay, and here you can see Docker containers are now gone. No more running containers. So I must need to, gosh. Okay, let's do this in a couple steps. I would be curious what Brant's opinion on this would be, if I'm doing this right or not. So I'm going to add a transient iLogger factory. And it's going to be, can I just do this? Null Logger factory? It's not going to work. There's no implicit reference conversion. Okay. Okay, new log. Okay, well, let's just see if that works. I basically just want to say, log. If you want to log, that's fine, but I'm just putting a null log factory. It's not going to actually do anything. This is the null pattern. It's a design pattern. So this kind of isn't a full integration because I'm not actually logging. I might want to consider doing that. But wow, okay. Okay, now I've seen this before with test containers. Is that this kind of intermittently will say response ended prematurely. And I don't know if there's a good solution for it other than just run it again. And this is another characteristic of integration tests, is that they can be fragile because they're using the real thing. And it's a lot of work to make that happen within a unit, within a automated test. So we'll try it again, see if we can get it to pass. And that will at least show me that it's the same intermittent error and not something that I've done wrong. I was hoping this wait until ready async would solve that issue, but seems like it's still intermittent. Okay, now it's back to the logger factory error again. Why is it doing that? Let's see, options dot logging equals new. Let's just do it there. Do it in both places. I don't know. Is there something like add iLogger factory? I'm just going to try to fill this up as much as I can with Logger factory. I don't know. Add singleton maybe? Yeah, I don't know. I did not anticipate this. So there we go. Nifty Solomon this time. We're running short on time here. Okay, now this is another prematurely. So again, the only thing I can do is just kind of run it again. Hope that succeeds. Stupefied Blackwell. So it's always adjective and then last name of computer scientist, I believe, is the way it comes up with these names. If you let Docker name them. I hope I can just get a passing test before we can shut this down. Oh, gosh. So now it's back to Logger Factory again. It kind of waffles between Logger Factory and unable to, able to connect to the container. Oh my gosh, that's frustrating. This Logger Factory thing. Okay. Well, I think we got to call it a day. I'm running out of time here, and I think we made good progress. I do need to, I'll do this off stream, is figure out if I can get NoSQL Migrator to behave correctly with base classes. Something I didn't anticipate when I was building that, and clearly it's a real world need for that framework. So I need to go and handle that. And then I'm going to see if I can figure out if this is the right approach. I'll probably just ask Brant, like, hey, how would you do this in integration test? And what about Logger Factory? See what he has to say. Speaking of Brant, didn't have time to cover this today, but I did want to talk about the, I don't have it anymore on one of these browser windows. Yeah, the JWT spec. If you remember back to, I think, the very first episode, the issue was token versus bearer and swashbuckle. And Brant actually chimed in on Stack Overflow with a workaround right here on how to do it. Of course, his comment is basically that the OpenAPI spec should be one of these well-known schemes. So these are all the lists here. Token is not one of them. All right, so it's weird that JWT kind of says the spec should be token, but that's not one of the expectations. So I have that question in with them as well. Basically, like, hey, what's the deal with this? Does it have to be token, or should it be bearer, or what's the deal? But Brant came up with a workaround as well. I might give this a try and see if that works. Really not super important because Postman does work just fine, but I would like Swagger to work if possible. So I'm going to work on that. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for joining me, everybody. Let's see who we can raid before I close down, if anyone's still left. Let's see. We've got Jean-Baptiste. Let's just make sure this is in English. Looks like it is. Some cool stuff going on there. It looks like data flow models and stuff. Marco Bruno is also streaming. This looks like a non-English one. Sounds like it's in English to me. So we're going to raid Jean-Baptiste today. I hope you will join me over there. Thank you very much for joining me today. I will be back on Tuesday for another stream. On Friday, I will actually be out of town at the KCDC conference. So I will probably not be streaming on next Friday. So sorry about that, but you can definitely check out the Live Coders list for more great streamers. And also, don't forget to follow Aaron on BioZAL. Give him a quick follow and see what he's up to with his streaming. So we're going to kick off that raid right now. Thank you very much for joining. I hope to see you over there, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Raid is almost ready, so we're going to go in about 5 seconds from now. Okay? And signing off. Have a good one.